Year. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. I hope everyone had good holidays and safe holidays, and a happy new year to everyone. I hope the new year brings us some light at the end of the tunnel as we go through the rest of this school year and the overall year. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held on Saturday, January 9th at 8:30 a.m. in the board meeting room. With that, going to the agenda, Dr. Adley, update on school opening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you here, and also to those who are participating virtually. And again, Happy New Year to everyone, and a healthy, more than anything, a healthy, safe New Year. I'll just take a couple of minutes, if I can, just to update the board and those who are watching, just on a couple of COVID-related matters. Certainly, we've had some developments since last we spoke, and with the plan to come back to school this particular week when we went virtual. So that's another, I'll just make a comment, another factor to make a comment on, and to bring people up to speed as to why that was done. So there's a couple of wee issues I'd just like to address quickly. The cases, the metrics, the decision back into remote decision, how that was done, the quarantine practice that we have in place, plans for vaccinations for our staff, and then you can see the rest of the comments that we're sort of talking about. Well, actually, I'll just go to the metrics first of all. These metrics are actually, as of today, obviously January 6th, it says, actually that's the third, I've just updated. As of today, that number is 32 on the current cases, 56 on the quarantine, 139 on the cumulative cases, and cumulative quarantine 1,145. Tonight's update thus far is that we have at least 10 cases that I've just been apprised about. So after this board meeting, we'll see what the final number is, and perhaps Alicia will have it for me this evening. But again, just as an update, that was as of January 3rd. Those totals are 32, 56, 139, and 1,145. Our own cases for Darien, as last reported on the 26th, were 115 cases and 37.8 per 100,000. So over the last couple of months, if you were to look at like November 19th, we were at 26.3. Then we have the 37.8 at the sort of Christmas break, so to speak. And as of today, it's 34.1. So you can see we're just sort of steady in that regard. We're still high. It's gone up at Christmas, but it has come down again. So it's just sort of fairly static at the moment, but it's still high in that regard. So if I may just comment on the decision, I'd like to bring people up to speed. The intent, and I want to be very, very clear about this. My first priority is the health and safety of these and the staff that work here. And that's the only reason I make the decision, the final decision, in regard to what mode we are in. There are different factors that go into that, but that is my only motivation and biggest and first responsibility and priority is health and safety of our children and our staff in the buildings. So over the break, after the Christmas break, after the Christmas holiday, I thought it very appropriate, if I'm going to change models, I have to consult with our medical advisors. Right? You and I are not medical professionals. Certainly I can bring stuff to the table, but I can't bring the medical expertise to the table. So I believe it was the 30th when I had I called a meeting with our medical advisors, our health department, and our district medical advisor, and also Alicia. And I will say this for people, I actually was going in thinking we were coming back, and that's an honest appraisal. I think that's what you want, brutal honesty, right?
I'm sorry, Dr. Adley, can you repeat that last line?
Yes, I actually called the meeting thinking that we would be back in the mode that we left, right? Elementary, full in, and hybrid. With that being said, the process is a mutual process of decision making. During that particular meeting, it became clear that the sentiments of our medical advisors were that they were very, very concerned about the amount of travel that they have experienced through contact tracing and knowledge of the community. They were very concerned about the gatherings that were taking place that they were aware of. They were extremely concerned about the possibility of delays in results. And the ultimate decision was made collaboratively to defer for another 5 days, and the decision is made in terms of safety, but also to protect what we actually want to do, which is have the children in. We're not disputing, nor are our teachers, that the best place for our kids is essentially back in school as quickly as we can, right? And as safely as we can. In order to achieve that, it was in the best interest of everyone in the district and the community to keep everybody out for a week, for another 5 days. That was why the decision was made. That's the only reason why the decision was made there. And that's simply a collaborative process. Yes, there are other factors that go into that. What's the readiness in the schools? Are our staff ready to, or do we have available staff? I certainly was concerned about, coming back on Monday and having a significant disruption. But I had that concern like before the break. So I did have that concern before the break, but that was significantly elevated during that meeting. But the bottom line of it is with the health and safety, and also with protecting what I hope is a future opportunity to go back to school in the in-person mode, or at least in the in-person mode for the elementary children, and a hybrid mode for our secondary levels. That was the only motivation that those decisions were made. We do have our medical advisors present this evening because they're part of that particular process. And we certainly want to have that discussion, but staffing is always a consideration too. But to be honest with you, the staffing, for the most part, well, first of all, our staff have been coming to school. I mean, they've done a remarkable job in terms of personal days and sick days. They're not too much different than they have been. So they have been coming to school and they've been doing the right thing, but there have been a couple. There's been one incident at the middle school where we just couldn't staff it, right? It just got to the point where it just wasn't feasible to staff and you couldn't run the buildings. People were being pulled from special services, support services, and we just didn't also have enough coverage. Royal was getting to that point. I mean, Royal was at a point of, I guess, so many subs in the building and so many people just trying to hang on and provide service there that I was concerned. I was getting to the point of being very, very concerned about that and possibly closing that school, either for a day or for a period of time. If you're asking, well, what goes into that? Well, I lean very, very heavily, not just on metrics, but on the culture of the school, the practice of the school, what the principals tell me is happening, what I'm observing is actually happening. And honestly, it comes down to a trust factor of that. We put all those factors together and in consultation with our medical advisor, I have a final decision to make there. And that's a collaborative decision to make. It's just not a straight line, a straightforward process. But there is no intent to mislead this board. There is no intent to mislead my teachers. And there's certainly no intent to mislead my community members and my parents. And if that is raised, and it has been raised, I'm sorry if that's perception, but that the only focus I have is keeping your children safe. And we're in a pandemic, and we're going to continue to have to make changes as we move forward. And I respect, certainly I respect our parents' concerns. There's no problem with that. But I just want to share with you that is essentially the process that we go through in order to make a decision. It's not just yes, certainly it's these numbers to some degree. That's one factor, and then the other factor is other points of data and other qualitative and quantitative input. That's really the decision. That's how it's been made. I will say this, that we had the same discussion yesterday And upon that discussion, we will be returning to school with elementary full in and middle school and high school back in the hybrid model starting on Monday. I think some questions that might come up are, well, what might change that? Well, if some of the metrics start to fall, that might change it. That would be a big thing, and also in the consultation of what our director of health and our medical advisor are seeing on the ground. And I think that the district has actually, I would say to you, they have led the way in many areas, your staff, from March to the start of this fall, and the quality of education that we're trying to provide the kids. It's a perfect, this is not a perfect model we're working on. Certainly everybody would respect everybody's doing their best, and I respect that, right? But I think we're doing more than doing our best. I think we're doing what's right for children and delivering as quality an education as we possibly can, and a high educational experience for kids. So I just want to make that clear, because I know it's confusing. I apologize, people, for what seems to be a last minute decision, but I make a decision. If I have a meeting on the 30th with medical advisors, I can't just turn that around. Right? I have other meetings and communications to do with principals and getting them together, having plans together, have communication. So as soon as you make the announcement, you have to be ready to go. I certainly don't want to make a last minute decision, but in some cases it might be depending on the vacation or the time period, or at least it may give that perception. So we will be coming back with the intent of, the intent is to come back, and the thought process is that hopefully we may have seen some of these time periods where the quarantines has played out and the cases have played out and have been identified. I'll stop there before I talk about any other sort of metric here, or sorry, any other item I have on here, like the 180 days and that type of stuff, because I've got our medical advisors on, and this might be a good point to stop if you have a question from any one of them.
Do the medical advisors want to say anything?
Well, I see Dr. Kennefick there, and my eyes are not as good as they used to be for David, but is Mr. Knopf there, David there? He may be on a ferry, actually, which probably doesn't sound hopeful. I don't know if you're taking a question from John, or do you want to go to the medical advisors?
Yes, nobody from the medical side wants to speak.
I think Dr. Kennefick might, if he's invited to it. Dr. Kennefick, can you hear us?
I can, if you can hear me. Yep.
If you could speak just a little louder, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say, Dr. Ray, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I also want to say to Alicia and David, I think you'd be pretty impressed if you were sitting in that meeting, how well that team works together and advocating for our children. So I just want to make that point, because these people are committed their times and their talents and so on and so forth, and do a tremendous job for us. So anyway, with that, Dr. Kennefick, I think you have the floor.
Thank you. I've got a little bit of an echo, so bear with me here. I wanted to echo what Dr. Adley just said, which is, I think, the team and the process that we put together to monitor this situation is really working very well. We have an excellent working relationship and very good communication. And again, our overarching goal is to keep the staff and students as safe as possible in the midst of this pandemic. There was a lot of planning on the part of the town and the state, looking at all the parameters for running school during a pandemic, and not really knowing the natural course of this brand new disease. And I was just on a conference call with the State Department of Education and Department of Health, and the state epidemiologist, Dr. Carter, was, like many of us, amazed that the school districts were still not being significant sources of community spread or cases, despite case rates in the community that we would have anticipated would require shutdown of schools in most districts. And in fact, many districts, or most districts, have been able to keep hybrid and some in-person learning going despite case rates that are quite in excess of what we'd planned for in the summer. We've been following the data very carefully, and in Darien and like most of the communities in Connecticut, schools do not seem to be a significant source of community spread. Most of the spread we see are from events and activities outside of school. Of course, there's a lot of people in a few buildings, so inevitably there'll be some spread because we are in the middle of a pandemic and probably in its worst phase right now. But COVID has not seemed to be a significant pediatric disease, and it has not seemed to be that the kids who get it and the staff members who may get it have not been effective in transmitting it to others. Most of the quarantines we've done have not resulted in additional cases, and all of this argues, including our numbers, that the mitigation strategies that are in place to reduce the risk of spread are very effective in schools, probably more effective there than on almost any place else in the community, except maybe healthcare settings where we take extensive pains, to control the possibility of spread. I want to really thank Alicia because she's been doing an amazing amount of work under difficult circumstances to keep everyone safe and to track down these cases. I think we've had very effective contact tracing in our town, unlike many other parts of the country. So I'm very optimistic with the elementary school kids going back to in-person learning and the older kids in hybrid mode, and we will have to see how things go. Many experts are predicting the next few weeks are going to be very difficult times for infection. If there's any sense of luck to it, I think Connecticut, because we had that early surge, though we're seeing large numbers of cases, we're not seeing the severity that we saw in the spring. And our healthcare system still has capacity, unlike the desperate situation that's in many other parts of the country. There's also hope with vaccines beginning to roll out in the state. Many healthcare workers, probably most, have been done, and the next phase will include teachers, which will again greatly increase the safety of in-person education. So with that, I just stop and see if there's any questions that anyone might have that I could answer for them.
Thank you, Dr. Kennebec. Mr. Sini.
Yeah, thank you both for the explanation. In order to,
Is your mic on, John?
in order to maintain the continuity of in-person learning when we go in, is there anything from a medical standpoint or from a site management standpoint that we can add? And I think about things, we've had discussions about testing, and there's a cost-benefit analysis having to do that, but to help our staff maintain on-site learning on the testing side. Or I think about organizing vaccinations from a town-wide level or even a district level once it's our teacher's turn. And or further extending the net to add substitute staff or temporary staff to fill the need while our staff is quarantining or facing an illness within their own family. So I open it up to both Dr. Adley and our medical professionals on that.
I'll let Dr. Kennebec speak, if he doesn't mind, about the testing, because that's a discussion, Mr. Cheney, that has come up pretty frequently, actually, and we've responded in the same way. We do have a bullet here talking about the vaccination for teachers, but certainly, I don't know if David is back on just yet, but either David or Tim can talk about it, and I can also talk about it, as can Alicia. But regarding the idea of testing and what that offers or doesn't offer in terms of keeping everybody in school, Dr. Kennebec, would you mind addressing that again for us, please? Hopefully you heard me.
Sorry, I muted myself. Many people prefer me that way. So, so let me, yes, regarding the testing issue, as many of you may know, the CDC hasn't really recommended large-scale testing of in schools, and that's for a variety of practical reasons. One is it's really hard to test large numbers of people without putting them all in one place at the same time, which may actually do more harm than good by exposing a lot of people. Secondly, the testing for asymptomatic people, the rapid antigen tests, which are the quickest tests, are not really as accurate in people without symptoms. They do have usefulness in screening people with symptoms because they give us a very quick answer. But they're not very, they have a very high false negative rate for people who do not have symptoms. The better testing, which is the molecular testing or PCR testing, usually takes hours or days to get back, and so it's not really as practical for this kind of a mass screening. And the other thing with the screening, unless you do it every day, and in a perfect world we would do it every day, but we don't have that kind of testing capacity. It's a point in time, so someone could test negative on Monday and be contagious on Wednesday. So unless you're doing very frequent screenings, which again means you're lining everybody up, it's not very practical. For closed populations like college campuses where everyone's in place and doesn't leave, it can be a very effective strategy. Many colleges that have effectively controlled COVID have done that by essentially closing their campus and testing everybody and testing frequently. But I don't know that testing would do much more than provide a false sense of security to the students and staff because of its significant limits.
I'm sorry, I meant more of a convenience level for staff to, give them.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Again, in a perfect world, we'd have much more available testing, and I think a lot of testing sites are still struggling with capacity just because of the huge number of cases we're seeing right now in the pandemic. We're seeing, for my own patients, it's getting more challenging to get testing times, and the reporting is still pretty good, but it's still taking at least 2 to 3 days to get results from most testing centers. I also heard a question about the vaccinations. It looks, it's all a question of supply. I saw an email from David today about that. Teachers will likely be in the 1B category, which is the next category to be offered, and the logistics are currently being worked out in the town once we get a little more guidance from the state.
Just, can I follow up on that just real quick?
Mrs. Ritchie.
Regarding the vaccine. So the vaccine will be available in Darien. Will that be available in Darien for Darien teachers during that 1B phase? Do we know that yet?
That's the goal. Yes, we're still waiting for guidance from the state whether they're going to still use the same vaccine administration software system or whether it's going to be a different. But depending upon the number of doses that are given, teachers and essential workers are in the next round. But we're still waiting for guidance. We should get it either maybe tomorrow or early next week, hopefully from the state.
Good evening. This is David, and I do have some information about the next round. We have the roster for teachers and at the health department, and we will be uploading that into the system. So hopefully within 2 weeks or so, teachers will be eligible to be vaccinated. And that won't be just in Darien. They can go to any of the vaccine sites and sign up. Teachers, it doesn't have to be in just Darien. These vaccination sites are open across the state.
Thank you.
And then just the last part of my question, Alan, on the substitute and filling gaps due to, do you need more resources?
So the board, I want to express our appreciation to the board from our staff in general, and certainly from central services too, but particularly for the teachers on the ground. The board has been very responsive to come back and tell us what you need. And we have done that, and we have asked for resources, and the town through the board has supplied those. And at this point, there just comes a point where even if you had a lot of people, it just gets too disruptive with the type of people. And I don't mean type in terms of people. Well, I do mean type of but experience and so on and so forth. And there just comes a point. How do you know what that point is? Well, you know it when you see it, and you know it when you feel it. And at this point, I would say that there certainly personnel-wise, people-wise, I don't think we are looking for. It's hard to get substitute teachers, yes. But the last time we were sitting at the table, we did get some people, but some people come and some people go and drift in and out. I would come back to the table here. You've invited me to come back many, many times, and I'm not going to be shy about coming back and asking for resources. So at this point, no.
Good. Further board questions?
Can I jump in just one
Sorry.
second? I just want to clarify, when we say teachers for the vaccine, we're talking about paraprofessionals and administrators too. It's not just classroom or in front of student teachers. It's our personnel who work closely with students in all levels, just to clarify.
So is it simple to say it's the whole staff that includes facilities, maintenance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is kind of a priority list, the staff members who work directly with students on a 1-to-1 or, closer to 3-to-1 basis, who need, additional services. They're prioritized, but we will be, submitting as many names as possible to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
Good. Mrs. McCammon.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. My first is, I think we don't know very much about the new potential strain, but I was just curious if, to address the matter, is there anything that we need to be doing or that you are doing in terms of preparing for that? Or are we just in a wait and see mode? My first question. And my second is, we received a number of questions about special education and children in special education being able to access their services, planning for the remote environment, and children who cannot access their services in the remote environment. If Shirley could take a minute to address some of the questions that we've received and some of what I've just asked, please, or you.
Jill, can you repeat your first question?
Yeah, just whether, I think it's early, but just whether or not there is anything that we know enough to begin planning for any concerns about the new strain of the virus or the potential new strain.
So that question, that issue, we would be looking at that, just monitoring very, very closely with the team on a regular daily basis. I certainly don't want to overextend. You could say, why doesn't everybody coming back? Well, again, I don't want to, based on our best information, make a decision that would actually work against us. We also want to, certainly, we'll see how that plays out. We haven't made a big decision about that, other than we know it's arrived in Connecticut, it's arrived here in the shore, so we'll see what happens with it. It's just, that will definitely just be a wait and see and close collaboration. Support services, Shirley's there, she can answer, but I understand that the couple of days before the holiday and the couple of days, these 5 days, were a complete clear out of the school, right? Which meant inclusive of our students with needing special services or support services. That was intentional, because we felt it was important to take that opportunity, and with the worry that we had, it was even a worry to have people in school at all. And I'm sorry about that. These children are the children that need schooling the most. I know that, my staff knows that, you know that, and being in school is particularly important. It kind of like, we kind of went into a remote phase that we hadn't defined, so to speak, right, a little bit, in the sense of where those children would be out. But it's our intent that we are in a remote phase to service those particular constituents of students moving forward. I don't know if Shirley's on there. Shirley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. If I may just add to that, Dr. Adley, and Jill, to the question, if we were to go remote for a longer period of time, we are having that conversation for our specialized programs. Would we be able to consider the safety and health factors and possibly be able to continue to support our students with intensive needs? So that is an ongoing conversation with staff, with related service providers, and with the administrative staff pre-K through 12. Does that answer, Jill? Was that helpful?
I'll clarify it for Ms. McCann. Our intent is to provide those services for those kids and families.
Thank you.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification and greater explanation of why we were this week. I think some of the concerns that I've
Sarah, if you could talk. Yeah.
Oh, I was on. Sorry, I've been on the whole time. Anyways, just saying thank you for the clarification, the greater explanation. Some of the concerns that I've heard, and I think we've all heard about questions about the long weekend coming up, February break. What is there a plan going forward? These are just questions I'm throwing out. But could we test those that travel before coming in? Is there a way to you just have a better understanding going forward of when we are off for school for a little bit of time? What's the plan going forward?
So the honest answer to that is we haven't developed that plan. All right. We will be, and again, in close consultation with our colleagues here, looking at that time period. So that's the only way I can leave that, right, Sarah, at the moment.
Mrs. McCammon.
Some of the questions that we've received as board members are in our email or what have you, I think have a lot to do with people just looking for a productive way to be part of the conversation. That is extremely difficult at this time. I know you're making split second decisions all the time, and we've changed teaching so rapidly. But has there been any thought into any sort of, what does feedback look like to you? How are you envisioning talking with parents regularly? I mean, I know there's the staff to family connection, but are you looking at any sort of formal way to see take the temperature of parents in terms of what's going well or not?
So I would say that we have been inclusive of parents and provided opportunities and forums along the way to participate. And I work very closely with our CDSP and other organizations to understand how people are feeling or otherwise. And since the last sort of forums, we've been responding to what we're seeing on the ground at the moment. So perhaps we haven't had a forum in the recent time. I would have to think about what that actually would look like. That would be productive and helpful. But we did say along the way that we would continue to look for feedback. So that's a fair, I'll take that as a fair point to think about in terms of what that might look like. But we have had opportunities for people to share their perspectives. But maybe we revisit that again in a different way, perhaps.
Thank you. Mrs. Achman.
So I think Mrs. McCammon brings up a good point. But I will also say, I urge, and I see a lot of parents listening to this call, I urge and reinforce the superintendent's message that the best place to get information is the district. I think I saw a lot of information in kind of my social media feed search. Some of it really good questions and parents who had really had concerns. Some of it misinformation with people answering concerns that either isn't their expertise or is their understanding, but maybe as board members, we felt differently and we don't respond on social media. So I just would say, if there is a question, and all questions are valid, please go to the chair of the board, who will send it to board members, the superintendent, or the district, because I think in some ways we unintentionally spread anxieties in an effort to help. And I watch some conversations go what I might argue would be far afield with incorrect information. And I just think that kind of spreads anxieties, and there's enough anxiety at this moment. So I would just urge, I think any board member here wants to be responsive. We will all forward your questions immediately to the chair. The chair sends them all out to us, and or contact your principal or the superintendent, because I think that's, at least I felt as a board member, often I was answering phone calls or forwarding emails to the chair that were either misunderstandings or misinformation. And I want everyone to have correct information. So that would be my plea to the public. Please use your chains of communication. Please come to us if you have questions. We certainly can tell you who to talk to. or put you in that chain of communication. But I think that's the best way to get accurate answers to questions, even with well-meaning people trying to be helpful.
Any other further board questions or comments? I think, yes, Mrs. Ritchie.
I don't know if this is the right time, but I just wanted to touch on, you mentioned MMS, middle school and high school back to hybrid. And then you mentioned that if the metrics stay the way they are, or if they get better, that we could possibly see them going in person. Do we have any thoughts about what that would need to look like? Because it's great that K through 5 is coming back in person, but I think our middle school kids need to be back in person at some point soon, and I'm sure our high school kids would like to be back too.
Well, I would like I would like to welcome them back. In fact, I want to make sure that I take the opportunity when we've just announced they are coming back. If there's any young people watching here, I don't know why they would, but if they are watching, we are delighted to welcome you back. I'm sure your teachers are looking forward to seeing you. And honestly, I only said that as an example of one of the metrics that might contribute to a decision to come back. If those metrics were to fall or decrease further, that would be encouraging. But I'm not going to overcommit. I know people have talked to me about other districts and so on. Some of the plans for other districts that you might hear are going to place may not be in place. In fact, they might be closing altogether in different places. So it's like, again, we're making decisions with the health and safety of our children in this particular community. And if we can get our kids back to school, we will. But I'm not just going to do that. I'm not going to commit to one particular metric there. There have to be other signs. We certainly have to have staff who feel well. We certainly have to have metrics that would indicate that way and conditions in place. And these people on Zoom here, our medical officers, are going to help me.
Follow up on that. You probably can't opine on this, but just, do you think, is it your instinct that the vaccine, once it starts to roll out to our teachers and our staff, that potentially can be something that helps resume in-person school?
I have no idea. The same way as we asked everybody not to go places, not to travel, not to gather, right? And to those people who did, thank you. I very much appreciate that. But where the gatherings took place and travel and so forth, it all depends on, as a community, how we responded. And I guess we are where we are because we have responded well too in some capacity. That we're not completely through the roof with these numbers when you look at it across the Fairfield County metrics too. So I just can't commit to those things, Deb, to be honest with you.
Mrs. McCammon.
Speaking of travel, one of the questions I received from a number of community members is whether or not this period of time remote meant that we would have to go remote after MLK or after February because of the travel, potential for travel.
I'll certainly, again, I could defer to my medical officer, but I would say not necessarily. I don't know if Tim or David wants to kick in with that or otherwise. But
Yeah, this is David. The issue over the holidays was the family gatherings, and it wasn't so much travel. It was just a lot of people getting together for extended periods of time. We have a weekend for people to travel and do things. They could still pretty much isolate. And I frankly am not quite as worried about a short weekend or a little long weekend as much as I am for an extended gathering time for families, which is what happened during the holidays. Our weekly data does support the concerns that we had over that. And I don't see, Martin, the upcoming long weekend as being as much of an issue. Thank you.
Mrs. Ackman.
So again, I do feel like we started to see a little bit of neighbor v. neighbor and judging what people are doing. I think our only plea as a school district really can and should be to please follow the rules and the laws set out by the state. And if you are doing that and you are in compliance, it does not help us to pit neighbor versus neighbor. Like, we're supposed to be fighting a virus, not each other. And I think, David said it well. It's a matter of if if large groups are getting together and that's what we're asking people not to do, that's fine. There are certain people who traveled and followed the rules, and that's okay. I don't think we can start demonizing one another. So my plea, I think the plea I would ask the board to if we ever decide to make a statement on this, is please follow the rules set out by the CDC, set out by our state government. That's what we have to follow at this point. If at any point the federal government makes rules, but let's not turn on each other. Like, again, I don't think we need to be hounding each other's social media, making judgments. I think that'll complicate matters for us at this table significantly, and it does not help.
Any other further board questions or comments? I think just a quick recap, and I put together some thoughts after spending a lot of time on emails, phone calls, texts with parents, some students, definitely board members and the administration. But I think I want to start out by thanking everyone that's taken the time to email, call the administration and the board with your comments, your concerns, and your ideas. Though there is no playbook for running a school during a worldwide pandemic, and we're all frustrated how this unique situation has affected our kids. We're a fortunate community to be comprised of so many smart, thoughtful, and caring people. We're working hand in hand with our town health officials to protect our students, teachers, administrators, staff, and all of our Darien families. Our whole community as a whole in creating the safe environment necessary to educate our children, especially if we are going to try and do in-person school. Our goal has always been and remains to have all of our children in school each day. Adhering to the safety protocols, social distancing, and travel will continue to help reach that goal. Your concerns over remote learning or hybrid learning are understandable, and I assure you we hear them and we share them. We're fortunate to have one of the most well-respected superintendents in the state, an administrative staff second to none, and a dedicated, passionate group of teachers of teachers who are committed to our students and want to see our students in the schools each day. I'm sure you know they're not thrilled with remote learning either, and they want to see and educate our students. But they understand, as you do, that there's no easy solution to these complicated problems. They also understand that information and guidance in regard to COVID-19 changes rapidly. And then as Dr. Allen has said, Dr. Adley has said, the administration is tasked with making these decisions with up-to-the-minute information. With all that said, I want to reiterate that all of us hear your concerns, and reaching out directly to your principals, assistant principals, teachers, support staff, and of course, those of us on the board remains the best way to communicate with the district. So we know your issues and challenges and can work with you to address them, especially if they are specific to your children. The respectful professional dialogue most of us have had since the pandemic began has been challenged this week, I think, by social media. Rumors, misinformation, speculation, and general commentary, including demands, become incredibly misleading and have taken over. This accomplishes nothing but adds to the fear and anxiety of our students that they are already shouldering. While none of us would want our children to see some of the information spilling into social media sites, let's not fool ourselves. They're seeing it, in some cases sharing it, and in doing so, being made to feel insecure about the decisions being made to keep them safe. This does not discount the many reasonable parents expressing different opinions. We welcome productive debates, ideas, and suggestions, but looking to attach blame in difficult times is counterproductive, and we're better than that. Darien is an educated, professional, passionate community. Let's continue to work with each other with respect and seriousness. We're all feeling the strain of the last several months, and our mutual respect and thoughtfulness have seen us through. If you have individual concerns about your children, please take them up with your school's team. Those professionals can help provide the answers. Excuse me. The board is dedicated to keep moving forward together in what continues to be challenging times. We have a tremendously talented and committed education team in place, dedicated volunteer board of education made up of your neighbors and friends, and parents here too. Let us commit to a respectful dialogue, stay focused on our children, provide them the love and support they need as we navigate uncharted, challenging times. I appreciate you listening. Thanks for the emails, concerns, and ideas. we'll continue to get through this as a community.
Duke,
Yes.
Dr. Adley, did you say you had some comments on the hours and the days?
Yeah, just, if Mr. Chairman, you don't mind, I'll just
Sure.
quickly talk about these other bullets. The vaccination, you could have went to 7 days versus 10 days, and Alicia's here, but I think we can cut the chase and say it was the best and easiest solution, and the one with the less ambiguity and less sort of confusion or hard to monitor and so on and so forth. Unless you want to get into the details of that with Alicia, that was the reason to go with the 10. It was much cleaner to oversee.
For the quarantine.
Yes. Yep. Vaccinations we've spoken to, 180 days and 900 hours. So we do have teams of staff working on proposals for these. We can certainly feel comfortable managing the 900. The 180 hours for our youngest elementary is very difficult. I'm just sharing that with you. We haven't solved that problem, but we will bring back next week at the board with some proposal as to how we are. I will say, I'll just reiterate again, people can be doing remote, non-in-person stuff, like a plethora of it, but not well as opposed to what you're doing in school. But that being said, I cannot in any way encourage the board to pass over what is a statutory requirement. So therefore I will bring some back, but that will be some probably difficult choices to make. But at the next week's regular board meeting, we'll speak further about that. Teams are actually working on that right now. Food service and transportation, that sort of rolls into the COVID. I'll just speak to that real quickly. With our food service, with remote experiences and what we're, basically there's a loss there. And so you'll see that there's a deficit being run of over $200,000. That's going to come back to the board, the finance subcommittee. So this is just a wee precursor. We will offset that. We have designated an offset of that, of transfers. So it really is the same amount for the COVID expenses per se, once that, for the most part, once that expense is sort of, we've made the transfers to offset it. So it's sort of a wash, so to speak, but it is a change. Transportation, Rich has worked with the transportation company to make sure that we will receive credit for, or at least not as much of an expense for the days that we're actually not in school to receive, for those days to be offset against the budget. So that's helpful. Those are the main updates.
Dr. Adley, are we still at 900 hours or are we now at 885?
Oh, yes, we are 885.
I know it's a small difference, but as we look and count, our goalpost.
For us, yes.
Our minimum goalpost is 885.
Yep. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the board? Mr. Brown.
Just as we're looking at the numbers, Alicia, on the, I think it was 1145 was the current number from the earlier slide for people who we've taken out for contact tracing. Do we have any idea how many of those have been contagious?
Could you just say that again, Dave? You kind of faded out there.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
I my tone wrong. In terms of the number of people who showed up, I think it was 1145 in the right-hand column of the slide earlier who've been taken out for contact tracing. It was a cumulative number. Do we know how many of those have wound up being positive?
How many winded up being positive?
Right, yes. Same question I keep asking, Alicia.
You know what? I think maybe 2.
Okay.
Not many.
So
Not many, and those are kind of a stretch.
can I ask a follow-up on that? Because I've seen this question a lot. If someone's quarantining and positive, they may upload to the state, but they may not report to the school, correct? So would we have an accurate figure on that? They're not required to report to the schools necessarily during their quarantine. I know of more than 2 people. So I'm just saying your data and my anecdotal data don't match. And I assume that's because during quarantine, you don't have to report to the schools. You just have to report to the state.
You know what? I think maybe the difference is, and maybe I need to clarify. When we're talking about kids that we have quarantined in our school setting that haven't turned positive or have turned positive, we maybe have had 2. However, that total quarantine number includes all of the social, family, And other people that are students in our school, or maybe it's a teacher, and if they have students, they live in Darien and they have students in the school. So in a family setting or in a social setting, we've had more people turn positive, but not because of sitting next to somebody in a classroom, but because they were, I would say over the past week, the numbers of cases that we've had at the high school, I think we're at about 16 or 17. Those are all social cases, and a lot of those kids that were informed that somebody they were around tested positive have tested positive. So sorry, just to clarify, socially, there's been more, and I don't have that exact number. I probably could go back and figure that out. But as far as in classroom, teachers that we've quarantined or students that we've quarantined because they've come in contact with somebody in their classroom that's positive, we really haven't seen anybody test positive from that. So I guess that's where we get that idea of the mitigating strategies of mask wearing and the distancing that we're trying to do and things like that are seeming to make a difference. Does that help clarify?
Thank you. Good, Dave? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think Dave and I are talking two things. Go ahead.
I actually might have a follow-up for Dr. Knopf and Tim in a moment, but I want to stay on this topic.
I guess my point, I've heard this a lot, and I think what everyone's trying to get to is quarantining valuable, and is it quarantining at the valuable at the scale in which we're doing it? And what I'm saying is, if you've been quarantined for 14 days and you become positive those 14 days and you're already home, your positive test is going to go to the state and come into our overall numbers. It may not necessarily go to the school nurse so that they say, oh yes, I have another child who's positive, hence our quarantining numbers say, oh yeah, we have someone else that pulled positive. So I think it's a tricky number to get a handle of. I think it's a valuable number to get handle of as much as we can, but there are going to be positives in there that we may not catch.
Well, can we clarify that with the experts versus Alicia? Is that the actual case of what's going on?
We follow up with our families that have students in quarantine, and we do ask them to share that information. Also, that information about positive tests is shared with me from the health department. And so we are continually updating. So we have had cases that we've reported in our total number of cases, or that are listed on the current case level, that is as a result of somebody, a family member or social exposure to somebody testing positive in quarantine. So, maybe I don't have 100% of those numbers, but we do send a lot of communications to people who are in quarantine, asking them when they're getting ready to come off quarantine, if you've tested and tested positive, please share that with us, because it does change their dates for staying out of school. So if you test positive on day 5 of a 10-day quarantine, you then have to extend your isolation period for another 5 days to be in isolation for a full 10. So you might be out for 2 weeks.
I just want to clarify. So if
Wait.
someone's out on a quarantine and they test positive, they need to contact you.
We ask them to.
We ask
We
them.
ask them to, and the nurses do try to kind of keep up with that. I think we haven't probably captured 100%, but I think we've probably captured a lot of them.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that to say that anytime anybody gets tested, those reports come to the health department, and we communicate with Alicia multiple times a day on many days to make sure that we're on the same page with all these reports. So there's a great deal of communication that's going on back and forth, and all positive tests are reportable to the state, and we have access to that database. So we should know at some point, maybe a day or 2 or 3 after the test, but we do know who's positive, and we do communicate every day with Alicia and the nurses so that we're communicating with the schools.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. I just wanted to also clarify a point that I've had to clarify a bunch of times this week to people that have contacted me, that the Darien Public Schools are not the ones setting the quarantine guidelines and who is quarantined and who is not. That is coming from the state and the medical advisors. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And I think we've gotten a lot of, so there's some misunderstanding around that from what I've heard. So.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
So I just now had a quick follow-up to something Dave just said, and then just a other question. So real quickly, the reason I was asking about how many people are contact traced and wind up not testing positive is I'm just trying to understand, and the number of parents, obviously, and teachers, everyone's worried as they're spread in schools. It seems like, either through luck or through process or through a combination, it doesn't sound like a lot of people are catching this in school. So that's why I keep going back to the question. The other issue I wanted to ask is earlier when you were discussing the decision process around the holiday, the difference between a couple days versus a family gathering. Can you give any sort of color or a little bit more as to how that decision process works? Just for really looking forward to sort of level setting, we can have an idea of expectations. If it's a certain holiday where people gather, there's a perhaps greater likelihood we may proactively decide to close versus if it's a holiday where people don't really socialize. Like, is that a criteria that you look at, or could you tell us a little bit about the perspective process, things you would look at, to make a decision moving forward, as opposed to the numbers we see historically to make decisions?
I can jump in if you'd like. I just want to make a quick comment about the cases in quarantine. Keep in mind, many may be unreported because children are often minimally or asymptomatic with COVID, so they might not have been tested. So we don't really know the actual number of cases. We only know the number who were tested and tested positive. As for the thinking around the holiday, Christmas and New Year's had two very practical issues, which was that the holidays made a short week. And so testing facilities and reporting were significantly delayed because of the holidays happening over the weekend. And we were facing rising, in fact, record number of cases in town and in Fairfield County. So that entered into the thinking that even the results that we did have, or the data we did have to look at, might not be timely, and there might be a significant delay in getting reports. And in fact, in the week this past week, there were a number of positives that came in that would have required probable quarantining. So in retrospect, it seemed like a wise decision, at least to preserve as much hybrid or in-person learning as possible. As for future holidays, a lot of it depends on the case rates in the community, the status of the healthcare systems in surrounding our community, and the trends that we're seeing in the data. So it's short, an extra day off, and travel is not as important as social gatherings. If you look at the statewide data in Connecticut, which is interesting, there actually were more cases in December in remote learners than in-person or hybrid learners. So the conclusion is, with the quarantine systems we have in place, they are effective in keeping kids safe. I know it's frustrating for families to have kids out. We have recently reduced the quarantine period, which should be less of a burden to staff and to families. There was also a question about vaccination. We don't know yet, but it should lower the risk to the staff significantly, but it will not, in the short term, result in any changes in our mitigation strategies, because we still don't know whether vaccinated people can transmit the disease. We'll have more data as time goes on. I would say the single most important determinant of what decisions are made is actually the behavior of people in the community. So if school is important, I would echo some of the other board members, say be mindful of your activities, because every little risk you take adds up over time. And if school's important, I urge everyone to be mindful. I know everybody's tired. I'm certainly tired of this pandemic. But the case rates are very high. They're higher than they've ever been. In a crowded social gathering, there's a good chance there's someone who's positive there. So be very mindful, especially over the next few weeks, of activities. And with that preaching, I'll be quiet.
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just to follow up on the contact tracing, since we're not seeing, I haven't heard this, but since we're not seeing the spread in the schools, has there been any thought or discussion to a change to who would be captured in that quarantine based on contact tracing? Or is it just going to stay the way it is? I haven't heard any changes. I'm just curious if the medical professionals have heard anything.
There's been no recommendations for any changes to the current quarantining. I think those are public health protocols, and we're just, until the State Department of Education and Department of Health decide that they think that should change, I think we will continue to adhere to those protocols for the safety of everyone.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so I think one of the points you just brought up is that the fact that the remote learners have higher cases than students who are in school. So the question for me is that a case of that more schools are doing remote, so therefore there's a higher percentage, or that to Dave's point, that the mitigation strategies are working in school, and we should probably have more kids in school than doing hybrid or remote? It's a question. It's a question, not a statement. So I'm just unsure as to, is when kids are remote and hybrid, are they going out and interacting with more and more children and other people? And it's defeating the purpose of being remote, because the thought is if you're remote, you're not going to interact.
I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, but I'll ask if one of our professionals wants to answer that.
I would say, I think I've said here before, as I get older, I find the answer to every either or question is yes. I'd say, we really don't know. It's just an observation. What it does argue, though, is that being in school is reasonably safe, and that the mitigation strategies are working. I wouldn't necessarily jump to say that remote is less safe, because it's just gross data from the state of Connecticut, and many districts have gone on remote, and so we don't know really what the source is here. But it does argue again that most cases that we're seeing are from community activities, and that's really the place to. And of course, the board and the faculty and have very little control over what happens in the community. But I'd urge the community to be careful. School is a safe place, and to be just as safe as at home would be very prudent.
It was also the Connecticut State Department of Public Health recommendation this week. So you're balancing all of these things to reduce density where you can. So it's like.
Any other further questions or board comments around this? Well, thank you all for contributing to that conversation. Much appreciated.
Mr. Knopf, I don't know where you are, but that's the clearest you have been on any conference call that I've ever had with you. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad. Finally. Thank you.
May I ask at the board chair's pleasure, could Alicia give the board the update on tonight's COVID so she can send out to the public?
Sure.
We're here.
Oh, now you're asking me to be more prepared.
You always are.
Alicia, if you could just speak up a little bit too. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We have today reported 11 new cases.
One more.
There are 5 at the high school. I'm just going to pull this up. I'm sorry. I don't know it off the top of my head. 5 at the high school, 2 at the middle school, 2 at Holmes, and 1 at Royal. Oh, sorry, 3 at Holmes and 1 at Royal. So that makes 11.
Do we know if there's any quarantining involved with that?
Family quarantine. I think several of these high school cases are the result of being exposed over New Year's and that subsequent weekend. And so people that we knew were in quarantine and awaiting tests and symptomatic.
Any further questions or comments around that? Thank you very much, Alicia.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Dr. Kennefack, David, and Alicia, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Moving
you.
on.
Good night.
Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, presentation of superintendent's proposed budget for the 2021-2022 school year. So real quick, thank you, Dr. Adley, your administrative team, and all the administrators in the local schools for working on developing the budget that will continue to provide an incredible education for our students, continue to invest in our students and our education, and doing that all while working, I think, 7x24 on COVID responses and contact tracing and trying to keep our children in school. So thank you very much for that. But with that, the goal is to continue to invest in the incredible education that we deliver to our students, continue to look for efficiencies, and to continue to develop the right programs and services for our students. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Just as we transition from, yeah, we'll give you a minute. Okay, we can do that. It's always good when it swirls. We have one additional technology assistant in the budget, just for the record.
So Michelle's doing a great job.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. She's going to be here all day Saturday. Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Auckland. Oh, well. So good evening. It's always a pleasure and a wonderful opportunity to celebrate what we do in the district and to look ahead to the next year. And so it's nice to transition into that mode and to share some of the exciting things that we have before us. We have some challenges before us, but nothing that we cannot work through. And I say just as a chairman, before we started, just pay recognition to the excellent work of Mr. Rule as finance director and his staff, the efforts of the cabinet, Marge, Christopher, Shirley, and also recognize Mr. Lynch and Mr. Adams for all of their work. The principals at the school level, on top of doing everything else, trying to put a thoughtful and comprehensive process together, to our RC department chairs, and to every member of the departments and the staff, because they are all part of those that decision-making process. So for everybody's efforts, and including outside my own assistant, Nadine, Fiscal, your work is very much appreciated from myself and also from the board. Thank you. If the music's not therapeutic, everybody needs a little Fred Rogers in their life right now. But actually, his quotation here is actually very pertinent to the responsibilities that we have. This district supports education, has done through annual budgets, and it's clear to see through the staff and through the resources that we provide. And I think that's one of the responsibilities civically that we have. Our children may go through the system, and we certainly support school systems. Even we have community members, obviously, who children may have gone through or may not have gone through, and they're asked to support this budget. I think that's one of the challenges and wonderful opportunities that we have to provide for the next generation. And so with all of those sort of sentiments working hand in hand together, it sort of captures the year a little bit, in my mind anyway, and also frames what we're actually trying to do moving forward as we prepare all our kids. We're not going to miss generations or years of kids because of COVID, and we're going to do the best we can for all our kids moving forward. So with that, thanks Fred for framing the discussion for me.
Alan, can you just get a little closer to the mic? No worries.
Thank you, John. I'll just get real close to this thing. If it gets disruptive, that I'm touching it too much, somebody let me know. Board of Education goals always frame the budget, but remember, like the Board of Education goals this year are for this year. This budget is for next year, but some of them, I mean, some of them roll over. And also, even though it's not adopted yet, I will say that I'm continuing to work with the premises of the big ideas that are on the table right now for strategic planning. So it's with that sort of context and background, and also the context, the greater context of the state, the nation, the challenges that we have that frames the look ahead to next year. So a little bit of information just with background knowledge. Tonight, I just want to give you a sense. I think everybody, I'm looking around the table here, and I think everybody knows how to navigate the book, so I'm not going to get into that. But it gives you the opportunity to frame the issues, and then on Saturday to delve into them in more greater detail with further staff members. But I'll share just 9-year average. Clearly, when you look at that, last year was a bit different year. Well, I know, but we weren't in school for a good chunk of the year. The other thing is, I would say that just in general, if you're spending 99.7 on average of the budget. So in any given year, there are different things that take place regarding pluses and minuses and so on and so forth. But I think if you're spending 99.7 of the budget over the years, that would show good fiscal management and also good fiscal usage of the funds. This is just another perspective versus projections. Where are these projections coming from? These are the 5-year projections that we did like a couple of weeks ago, or it seems maybe it was a month ago or so ago, but they're done every year. I will say that they're trying to really develop over time, like 5-year plans. So you'll see some things that we discussed maybe last year, maybe in this, or maybe discussed as initiatives this year that you'll see next year. Obviously, FY22, we came in with 4.54. Now, 4.54 was what I came in with like just over a month ago with the 5-year rollout. And we'll see where that is, but the superintendent's version of that has come in today at 3.99. So those just give you a sense of what the projections were for versus what actually board approved adopted budgets actually took place. And we'll see what transpires this year, but before you is a 3.99 budget. This gives you a little bit of an idea of just a comparison again, so that's just useful to see the return on investment for our funds and for our taxpayers. So what does this show you? For instance, it shows you that we are lower than the average PPE of the DIRT. And if you were in Westport with our enrollment and their PPE, you would have to raise an additional $4 million from the taxpayers. Similarly, if you're in New Canaan, you would have to raise, or you would be have not to pay as much. You would have $1.5 million less. But you can see that we're well placed there, and again, we are lower than the average on the PPE. So essentially, those black numbers you would have to, positive numbers you would have to raise additional taxes for those funds. It's always a wonderful opportunity to, and a budget opportunity time period, just to celebrate a little bit, and we certainly do celebrate this year. There's a number of things that we have celebrated and should take time out for. It's been an interesting year, let's be realistic, since last budget. Last budget just, We're in the same sort of condition in March, and we've been in this state ever since. And there's lots of things to be thankful for and to recognize. They include the continual hard work of our students and our staff, and a commitment to the mitigation strategies, and to a high caliber level of remote learning right out the door in March. And I know that there's much discussion about that back and forth, but they have done a tremendous job. Our staff, and you should be very proud of them in that regard. And of our kids just hit the platform running, and continue to do so. I've always believed no matter what the situation is, kids rise to the challenges that you present to them. And if you model the behavior, they will step to the challenges. We have continued to have a number of the arts have continued to blossom even in this forum, and it's commendable to the children for doing the drama and the music programs that have taken place. It's exciting to see Ox Ridge come to fruition. I have some pictures for the board to send to them. Look at the groundbreaking up there that is underway at the moment, and that's just pretty exciting. We continue to be recognized this in the 2020 third best high school in the state of Connecticut. Newsweek just over a year ago did the best high school for STEM. Our young people still continue to perform in athletics and extracurricular areas. I think our cross country were the last ones to. I think they were in the Western Division of it. I have the information to remember the way they structured these things. But all our sports teams had different levels of success. And our recent SAT and AP scores were outstanding for our children. And there's been a focus on social emotional learning, and that's where it is most appropriate and the needs are at this particular time. And our quiz bowl continue to experience much success, and those are just wonderful programs to get the kids engaged in. So there's still a lot to be very thankful for, and a lot to recognize around the district. And those are just a few of the things. This just shows you again a chart that is the 2020 per pupil expenditure for every state, every school district across the state, and it also shows you the 2020 SAT scores for the class of 2020. It shows you the last score that they did. It's not necessarily the best score; it's the last score because that's the only feedback that we get in terms of every community. But you can see there that essentially the top right-hand quadrant, no one gets a higher score but spending less money in terms of your return on investment. So I think that's a compliment that we're right there. Well, we're more than right there, right? It's just a point in time, but all the other indicators suggest the same. But this is one that also, it's the end product that we produce that we're most concerned about, right? And that you want, as we finish well. And that's just on any given year, it can say something different, but it's pleasing to see that that's a good return on investment snapshot for the district and for the community. Enrollment's going to increase by 20 students, but you'll see over basically a 10-year period, it's going to stay at that. It's going to be at 4,600 kids basically next year, and 3031 it's going to be at 4,600 kids too. So we'll go up 20%, by 20 students, but it's going to then just stay relatively very steady. This is the class sizes. We've been able to maintain class sizes, good class sizes. The average class size is just under 20 or just at 20. So you'll see that we actually have, we increased here a section 5th grade at Himley, a section at kindergarten at Holmes, at Oxford, 3rd and 5th grade, and we reduced the 5th grade section at Royal. So if you remember last year that there was of the 106 sections, we reduced that to 103, and there's now net brings it back up to 106 sections. There's 2 sections that were increased at the high school for enrollment. It doesn't show it in the elementary, but the 2 sections at the high school. The budget essentially is 3.99. We did everything we could to keep the budget below 4 as best as possible. This just states the obvious that the 77% of our funding is tied up in employment, personnel, benefits, but we are employment-based, person-based organization. That should not be surprising to anyone in that capacity. I won't go through all of these in terms of what they are, but they basically represent the contracts and responsibilities that we have to address through these different salaries. But you'll see that it's $1.92 million. So it's basically near 2% on salaries. We'll talk a little bit about these moving forward, but these are contractual obligations that we have. We certainly have staff turnover. We plan for about 22 teachers. That's probably as high as we have done before. But we feel confident that we can put that number in there. Budget control is for 4, which it has been in the past, but I'm just noting it out there. And staff reductions, you see that we have had to make staff reductions in here. So anything that's added in this year's budget, there's been some difficult decisions being made to offset some of those to try and be reasonable about the number, but also continue to incrementally move forward here. So I'll give you the next page, sort of talks a wee bit about some of these staff positions, the increases, the decreases. So I'll give you a wee talking points tonight, and you'll be able to, on Saturday, be able to get all the details. But let's just sort of talk through it a little bit. At the high school, DHS, team teaching enrollment and enrollment. So there's an increase at the high school of students, and there's 2 positions there that are put in the budget for increase in enrollment. That's 0.6 in English, 0.6 in language arts, and 0.8 in math, or 0.6 in English, 0.6 in languages, and 0.8 in mathematics. Some of you have a greater background on the team than I do, but we've been looking at that sort of organized. I'll just say there is a tremendous amount of support at the high school. That's not a bad thing, but it certainly, if you're comparing it to around the district, there's significant supports. I mean, just significant supports, many supports that is not common in high school. That doesn't mean to say it's a bad thing, because you want to be doing the right things for our children. But there are some programs that you can continue to look at. One of them is actually the team teaching. They have opportunities for co-teaching. There's opportunities for labs. So the program hasn't gone away per se, because we're going to still keep that format in the sciences, because there isn't that support service in the sciences. But in the other areas of language arts, mathematics, social studies, that we're making some reductions. So there's 1.6 decreases and 2.6 increases. The 2.6 is 2 for enrollment and 0.6 for increase in STEM classes at the high school. And you'll see a little bit about that. There's a couple of courses that are going to be added in for design, introduction to apps, innovation courses. So there's two positions for enrollment and 0.6 for increase in STEM. So middle school library, we're reducing one of the librarians at the middle school. So all of this sort of is to sort of offset and to come to a final budget number. Elementary class sizes, there you can see sort of the net 3 increase that I talked about earlier. SAS facilitators, I'm going to swing back to this, but the SAS facilitators is eliminating the positions at the elementary school, and there's one at each elementary school, and then the introduction back again of, I'll call them the SAS assistant principals. Have you noticed if you notice the bold numbers, because when you get down to the blue, you have to sort of add the bold numbers together. So the DHS, the librarian paraprofessional, that will go from 2 to 1, and the 1 will go to the middle school because there isn't one there, and that will help the person, that will help the one media specialist who remains at the middle school. Elementary instructional paraprofessionals and lunch monitors. So when you look at the right-hand side, it says minus 5.5. It's reducing one instructional paraprofessional at each of the schools. It reduces one that we added at Oxbridge, and then it adds back a 0.5 paraprofessional for enrollment, and that gets you to the minus 5.5. The 4.62 is the addition of sort of like 10 people, but very part-time people. So this was a tough decision to make, a trade-off, what we feel is at least, I would say, a creative trade-off to make supervision and for things to work, to work comfortably. Technology and copy center, so we will be eliminating one of the paraprofessional positions at the copy center, and we will be adding in a technician for technology. If you remember, we added some in this particular year, so we're keeping one of those positions in. You may recall that were you not thinking of two positions? We were. We would like two positions. We think we'll need two positions eventually, right? But for now, we have one in the budget. The teacher in residence program is the program that will allow a minority candidate, and it's encouraged throughout the state to promote the diversity and racial minority recruitment. And we've been trying to do that. Margin's been doing a good job over the years at trying to actually do that, and it's very hard. This is one opportunity we have with working with CRAC and CES to bring a teacher to Darien, a minority candidate who would be mentored by a master teacher here. And then at the end of the year, they'll be taking courses simultaneously of this job position that we would appoint them to that particular position. We have an educational paraprofessional here and transportation drivers. So there's -2 special education paraprofessionals being reduced from programming. That's IEP driven. And then we are increasing, we're increasing a paraprofessional as a driver actually, right? And we're purchasing a new Suburban to try and offset some costs, and that will offset about $100,000 or so in savings in terms of trying to do a paraprofessional, get the vehicle, and then reduce other expenses. We have a nurse that will fall under special education for needed for token each school. So when you add the increases and decreases, that's a net increase of just over 2 staff members. We've removed all the COVID. Certainly not going to flood out there that's nearly 16 positions we've eliminated. Obviously, we're eliminating all the COVID positions and then putting back or asking for the ones that we want. So overall, it's a net increase of 2.32. It will take a wee bit of time, I'm sure, for you to what's moving and what's trading off, but over the conversations, we'll get there with the explanation. But there are, suffice to say, there are a lot of moving parts. And not everybody's happy about all of it, right? There's this process of give and take a little bit. But in order, honestly, to move forward, we have to make some decisions. We have to look at some programs, way we do things, and make some decisions. So where am I? Could you just close that out, please, or something? Okay. Thank you. So these are the health rates and health benefits. The health benefits includes the net increase of 2.3, the 7.95. If you remember, we switched to Anthem for this year, and there was a cap of 7.95 that was negotiated skillfully from our business department. That's a cap. So we're planning on that. It'll be a couple of months before we actually know, but we probably are planning on that given our experience rate. But we'll know the final number, but it can't be any higher than 7.95. So again, that is a 1% of the budget right there alone. So just a wee bit of an explanation about the assistant principals, and I know we'll get into this further. But just essentially, you make the swap for $146,000, given what the SAS facilitators currently salaried are at, and what the swap is for, and given what this can bring to the table. When you look at, I understand it sounds 5 assistant principals. Well, you have an average administrator sitting there for about 350 hours, additional hours every year that they don't actually need to be there. However, that will not remove principals from certain scenarios, because I'm sure they'll still, well, you will want them, I will want them still to be involved, but not anywhere near to the extent of the requirement we have now to have 2 administrators at the table. It's just, I know there's a time and place for these. I'll also say that the positions, but someone recently asked me, does a new superintendent come in and then just add all the programs he wants? No. And it's not to say that programs that were in place were a bad idea by any other superintendent. Right? That's not the case either. But it's just a fresh set of eyes, and at a certain time and place, something was the best way to do something, right? For the reasons that were before us. But there's just an opportunity with a new set of eyes to say, is that right now, is that the best way we should be done it? And could it be done differently or otherwise? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. And this is supported by your principals and by special services department. I think everybody has an opportunity to benefit from here. Parents, the services for all students, and not just special education students. The efficiency of what you get back from the amount of hours and so on and so forth. The SAS facilities don't have the ability to supervise. And there's influence that can be done, a different level of influence when you have when you carry a different position. And that's just the reality of it. So we feel I know it could be a hard sell, just 5 administrators, but for $146,000, you may have this is an opportunity to make a significant improvement. Special education. So the increases in the salary for personnel. The $272,000 is essentially the positions for contracted services, and also buses for ESY. ESY, we didn't do ESY, so we go from a revised budget, so now we have to put in the buses back in at about 150,000 or so. So about 150,000 at special education. Line item of 272 is buses. The excess cost, we are actually getting less money back because the reimbursement rate is dropping to by 67.5. We are at about 75 at this particular point that we budgeted that we have budgeted for this year, but next year the indication is it's 67.5. So that's a 1.1% increase. So when you take that 1.1 and you put it with the health at 1 point, there's another just right away 2% in the budget. So just some other highlights I had to talk about. It's not everything, because you'll see some nice things coming out from our RCs. The class sizes are protected here. We're continuing to promote STEM in the system, up and down the system. These are things that the board's interested in. There's goals. These are things that have come through superintendent's entry plan, through strategic plan, and so it's a nice way to do that. And we're at the moment through this particular budget, we're supporting it at the high school, and of course we continue to support Project Lead the Way at the middle school. I'm pleased to share that the administration went to the Darien Foundation. At a different meeting, we will discuss a proposal from them to support their robotics program, K-12, which is an extracurricular club, over $200,000 over 2 years, and that's a very gracious and extension and offer, and we'll bring that separately from the budget, but it just gives a wee sense of also just trying to promote STEM offerings for kids. We are going to continue social emotional learning support, and we're going to complement that with the roller approach from Yale. And I know we've been doing our own work, so it doesn't do away with that, and we can sort of have an explanation about that. How's that going to work with the work that we're currently doing? One-to-one computing, well, it's here, so we're not taking it away, that's for sure. So we're sort of committed to the K-2 right now, and also we have been committed to the freshmen changing when they get to the high school. So it's really K-2 devices. It may not be, there may not be iPads necessarily. That decision has not been made for our youngest students, but it will be one of those. It will be a tablet of some description. But again, more to come on that through the budget process. Upgrades to network and wireless technology infrastructure that we had to do for currently the COVID situation. That's a carryover. So there are some things that are sort of carryover from COVID. One would be the infrastructure, another would be a technology technician, and some other just improvements for technology and software that we have committed to. So for instance, no one's going to like say, let's not have Zoom next year, right? So those things have to carry forward. The opportunity to participate in the open choice program is not delineated here because we're still working with legislators behind the scenes to see if that can actually happen. It would be at a revenue's incidental for the most part. It's $3,000 per kindergarten student. It's not built in here, but essentially we would take 15 to 18 kindergarten students at homes, Oxridge and Hinley, split because they can accommodate them. We wouldn't put them in the other schools because too close to tipping the classes. And I would recommend to the board that if this is able to come to fruition, that we would start at kindergarten. I think having the children at the earliest grade level gives them the greatest opportunity to be successful. But with CES and some of our legislators and some of the surrounding superintendents, I'm hopeful that this actually might happen. But it's not really, there's no expense or revenue in the actual budget, but it's an ongoing discussion that hopefully can coincide. The teacher in residence program, I think I just spoke about that a little bit earlier. That's originally we're thinking about 2 teachers in this program, and that was being about $140,000. But we similarly to the technician, now we're going down to 1 teacher. So these are the areas to support diversity initiatives. The facility assessments, but I only pull that out because it's a big number. It's around $200,000, and as it informs our capital program. It does maintain the added bus that's already in place. It doesn't accommodate any of the plans moving forward, potentially, of any decisions that the board may make to any of the options from the other study. With your understanding, I won't read everything in the capital. We've gone through that, but suffice to say, there's carpet to be replaced, there's pavement around the districts to be done, there's a roof to be done, Royal School, and some security upgrades with security cameras and emergency lighting. Those are the main things. You can certainly read these. I won't go through every single one. The high-level summary of the budget. Well, 3.35 of it, when you frame it, is contractual increases, special education contract, enrollment-driven increases. The COVID carryover, those are the things that from software to technology to the technology assistant. This is what's in the COVID carryover. Budget control, I just pulled it out there because it's a big number. Whenever we're trying to make numbers work, it's just it's certainly a nice thing to have, but we can see how it contributes to the number. The building condition survey again. Without the net changes that we did here and the moving around of things, we would not be able to make the improvements that they were actually making, but they actually net out essentially to 0 in making those changes. And thus we're left with a 3.99. I will say your principals have made some tough choices. Principals by nature, and I was too, as Christopher was very protective of the building, and I understand that. But there's also a point where they're making some collective decisions for the betterment of the community in general. And they've made some what they would call trade-offs in terms of trying to realize some efficiencies in order to get some of the things that we want, which would include the SES facilitator. So that I'm pleased to present to the board on behalf of the administration at 3.99 budget this year. We look forward to our RCs on Saturday. I'm happy to answer questions where you want to address them tonight or otherwise, but I'm pleased to bring up before the board for the proposal for review and possible adoption.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Thank you, Rich, team, and everyone in all the schools for well thought out presentation and overview of what I know many of us have already started working on. And just as an FYI, all the books have been delivered to our partners, the Board of Finance, RTM Education, RTM F&B, CDSP. So a lot of people picked up their books today. So we'll begin our work in earnest on Saturday morning, but I'll open it up for board questions and comments. Mrs. Ritchie.
I just had heard a rumor that there might be some pages needing to be replaced in our binders. Is that true or no?
So there are 2 pages we'll hand out on Saturday.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other board questions or comments? Mr. Brown.
Hi, thanks. I just had a couple of questions. Just looking at this as we're sitting here. The number, Rich, and it may just be the labeling, the contractual wages and insurance and benefits, is that pure contract? Like if the contract's just rolled forward, here's the number, or is that inflated? Or is there no way we can just get pure contractually, we have to go up by X?
So it's the collective bargaining agreements that we have for the staff that are currently in place.
Right.
Rolled over to the new year for whatever their contractual agreement is. It includes the health insurance increase at that 7.95% Dr. Adley had mentioned, as well as contractual increases for like dental insurance, life insurance.
All right, so that 7.9, that's contractually, we have to pay whatever that is. I think it's 7.9 or lower, but.
So we have a rate cap of 79.95%, so we can't exceed that. If our claims are lower, it could come in lower. Currently, our claim experience is not very good, so we are anticipating it to be the same.
So it's not 2 separate things. We're obligated by the contract to make those payments to the insurance. Okay.
Just point of order. I don't want to get too far off because this is not our budget discussion. So I think maybe the questions should be more appropriately posed on Saturday. So I don't want to get too far into that because we're not really having our budget discussion right now.
Yeah, I just got a document when I sat in my seat and I'm trying to understand it in the context of this meeting. So I probably have one.
Fun to mention that because I don't want to go too far into this discussion. It's not appropriate to have it right now.
I have 2 more questions in the presentation, if I may.
Go ahead.
Make sure I'm understanding it properly.
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
The enrollment driven increases, those are also tied to contractually tied in.
So they're teachers for elementary class size. So assuming that we maintain the current elementary class size constraints, those are that plus the reduction, like Alan mentioned, the Royal 5th grade class, and then it against the total classes that we're taking.
Right. And then one last thing on the SESS assistant principals, we had the one chart on page, it's the personnel summary, the 2.32 chart. And it's a net change. We have 5 out and 5 in. But then we see on the next page, there's a cost difference of 145. So I'm reading this, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this properly. It's 2.32, that's pure FTEs, that's man hours, but there's no associated costs, and these are
Those are just FTEs on that.
Okay, so do I know whether this costs me more money or less money?
So on the following, I think it was 2 tables later,
right?
The assistant principal position is about $146,000 more than the current teacher assessment facilitators.
Got it. And the other positions on there?
For the assessment
The
facilitators?
cost difference plus or minus for the other positions? If it's not in here, that's cool. I just want to make sure I'm reading.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there are
Yeah.
pluses and minuses.
I think they're in your budget book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Good. Mrs. Ogden.
I would just add, 3.99 sometimes can be sticker shock. We haven't seen numbers like that in a while, but as you do an analysis we were asked to defer over $1 million of costs. So if you look at our budget that we approved last year prior to the Board of Finance cut, it's actually only a 2.8% over what our plan was. And so I know we have to look at the actual 3.99, but I think that's a good context for if COVID had not interrupted our plans, we would still be on that, trying to keep it in the high, getting around that 2.5, anywhere in that range. But, COVID and an immediate need met us. So I just think before I see lots of RTM, education, and F&B people, which I'm happy to see on this call, but I think some context might be good. But 3.99, we should put in context.
That's a very good
Yep.
analysis.
Yeah, it's very good. Thank you
I
for
hope
bringing
they
that to
also,
the
I
table.
hope they also see though that we've made some efforts to make offsets and realize efficiencies in order to try and move forward a little bit. Otherwise, we're going to be, in my opinion, going to be very, very stagnant with some of the challenges of some of the constraints that are before us. Yes, noted.
Good context to think about as we go forward. And I think some lessons learned from COVID as to technology and what we need there to serve this and continue to maintain the technology that we've invested in, which has played out well in this COVID environment as we've moved in and out of some of these learning models. So good, thank you. With no further questions or comments around that, our work will begin in earnest on Saturday morning. I will move now to public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and/or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Alicia Melberg, you are unmuted and recognized.
I didn't expect to go first. Thank you, Alicia Melberg, 24 Christie Hill Road. Dr. Adley and the Board of Ed. As we have seen, the past 9 months have proven that the administration, teachers, school staff, and the community must continue to work in collaboration to keep everyone's best interest in mind. My elementary age daughter's eyes light up every day that has been an in-person day. School has become a happy place, as it should be. Thank you, homeschool, our superheroes. In the fall, I publicly spoke of the mental impact remote learning had on our young learner. This concern remains high today. As I talk with more parents, this valid concern is increasing not only in numbers, but across all age groups. I've reached out numerous times to ask the Board of Ed and the administration to address this. What measures are being taken to ensure that our children's mental health is considered between transitions? The communication on December 31st left many of us to question the transparencies of the administration. The fact that parents are reaching out to others, whether directly or social media, for any type of information illustrates there's room for improvement in this area. I recognize that remote learning has made improvements since the spring. I attribute most of the success to fantastic teachers and support staff. The efforts made are noticed. However, with all of these efforts, they cannot offset what is lost from not being in the classroom setting. The negative impacts from the lack of social interaction among peers is something we cannot measure. While some may feel a week here or there of remote is not material, for many young learners like mine, we quickly see negative regressions. I've had conversations with a few of the board members, and I welcome all to discuss our experiences and concerns. I still question what avenue is best for parent feedback with the administration. It is vital for you to hear from your end users. Tonight, I ask the administration, 1, to address the community with the mental health aspects when making transition decisions. 2, to improve communications to be clear and transparent. 3, to create a platform to enable parents and students to leave feedback on remote learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Melberg.
Elizabeth Drew, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Drew. I live at 14 Du Bois Street.
I have a kindergartner and second grader at Hindley. Happy New Year, Dr. Adley, Duke, and the entire Board of Education. Thank you for meeting tonight and inviting public comment. I know this meeting was for budget purposes, but I also feel the need to speak on the school reopening. Duke and Dr. Adley, thank you for recognizing tonight that you hear us concerned parents. That really, really means a lot. I think we definitely need more outlets to share parental feedback. So Sarah, thank you for bringing that up. We need more opportunity to share. And for me, these Board of Ed meetings feel the only way our experience is heard. I speak tonight to ask you, Dr. Adley, to make the decision to return our children to full in-person learning on January 11th. As we know from Dr. Fauci, pediatricians, scientists, and DPS's own medical advisor, spread is rarely happening in schools. As Dr. Tim explained on the BOE meeting in November, and Governor Lamont has stated numerous times, kids are safer in school than in their broader community. And as Dr. Tim mentioned tonight, the mitigation strategies DPS has employed, they're really working. E-learning remains an enormous stress and challenge for both of my children and our family, as well as hundreds of families across Darien. We worry about the long-term education and mental effects these lost months of learning will have on all our learners. We ask that you return our children to in-person learning, as your communication yesterday indicated, and as you shared tonight. I also want to address something I have seen and heard regarding parents who are advocating for the return to in-person learning. A Darien resident wrote something really disturbing on the Teach Our Kids site. Teach Our Kids is a group that was very thoughtfully organized to rally parents who believe our kids should be back to in-person learning. This member of town wrote on this site that the parents who want their kids back in school, quote, blindly attack the administration, teachers, and staff. Their complaints imply that Dr. Adley and his team are trying to screw kids, end quote. Dr. Adley, teachers, and administration, board, please let me assure you that this statement could not be further from the truth. Just because we want our children back in school does not imply or mean in any way that we do not profoundly appreciate, respect, and thank you for all of your diligent work. We know you are working insane hours. You are making decisions you never imagined. You are what allow our children to learn, to thrive, and grow in an educational setting. We just ask that they have that opportunity to do so in school. Finally, one last reminder that any family who is against in-person learning or doesn't feel their child is safe in school can choose to go remote. But parents who want their children in school do not have that free choice unless Dr. Adley reopens our schools. Thank you so much, Board of Ed, for your volunteer work in this tremendously uncertain time. Good night.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew.
Jamie Zionic, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, thank you. Jamie Zionic at 15 Holmes Court. I'm co-chair of Darien's CPAC. We haven't had a chance to discuss it as a group, but I'd like to say I strongly oppose making facilitators assistant principals. I think it provides an environment of, it decreases inclusion and creates a division between special education and general education. Sue Gam addressed it in the 2014 report that was paid for by the Board of Ed, and she was opposed. I strongly recommend that the board review that plan again. Also, I agree with Elizabeth Drew as far as teach our kids. We are strongly, I think most of the members that posted that group want to see our children in school, but are very thankful for the contributions of the teachers in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zionic.
Jamison Riley, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, my name's Jameson Riley, 105 Holmes Ave in Darien. One of the questions that my wife and I had was to Dr. Adley and the board, which both thank you for your time. One of the questions that we had is the continuation of Friday half days, even if we do go back to in-school learning for the rest of the school year. There hasn't really been a clarification as to why we're staying half days on Fridays. And if there is the possibility of this to change, to go back to full days, if the science and medical experts all pointing to being in school is safer, why are we still having half days on Friday? It doesn't really add up with that. And the second thing is that I just want to say to those that are opposing the social media and saying that that's not a good avenue for us to be expressing our opinions and our voice, that it just silences any opposition, dismisses the voice and opinions of others that may oppose what is being presented either by the board or by other people online. For that matter, it isn't just silencing the board, it silences or opposing the board, excuse me, it opposes potentially other people online that are trying to silence it. There should be equal ability for either opinions to be heard. That's the only voice that this opposition of being remote has. As others have voiced, they've all wanted to have some sort of formal avenue of getting to Dr. Adley or being heard at least by Dr. Adley and the board. And I think that the whole reason why this group that is obviously not being named, which is Teach Our Kids, it's not being named by the board, but it's very obviously being targeted as needs to stop kind of remarks. The whole reason it was created was because we weren't being heard. And if we were being heard, this group probably would have never been created. So that's one of the main things that my wife and I ask, is that Dr. Adley and the board, something be set up where we know that we're being heard, and then we don't have to be on social media. We prefer to speak directly to the board and to Dr. Adley. And if we realize that we're being recognized, then we don't need to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley.
Jonathan Dunn, you are unmuted and recognized.
My name is John Dunn, and I live at 175 Raymond. Tonight, I'll address my comments first to Superintendent Adley and then more broadly to members of the board. We know that our schools are safe environments for our children and that classrooms have not been the main drivers of COVID spread. Darien needs a superintendent who exhibits consistency, transparency, and most importantly, dedication to students. Unfortunately, I believe the administration has rarely demonstrated these traits this year. Instead, Superintendent Adley has chosen to say one thing while doing another. It happened in August when he went out against his own previous statements, and it happened again at 4:21 p.m. on New Year's Eve. We deserve better. Superintendent Adley's decision to extend remote learning has an enormous impact on the town. As a follow-up to his comments tonight, I would respectfully request that before the next Board of Ed meeting on January 12th, the administration provide extensive details from his meetings with the Director of Health, the COVID Compliance Liaison, and the District COVID Response Team, including meeting minutes, scientific data, and a list of participants and their specific advice that led to the decision to extend remote learning this week. These types of decisions should not be made behind closed doors. We need to know more. We need full transparency now and going forward. Parents and students should know exactly which individuals and what evidence prevents schools from reopening. If Superintendent Adley can find time to produce and record a puppet show video, he certainly can provide more than just 6 general bullets on the rationale for continuing remote learning in his email announcements. Now, I'd like to speak briefly to members of the board. As concerned parents, we are looking to you for leadership to represent the best interests of students during these tumultuous times. A board member campaigned in the fall with the slogan, "Children First." I don't think there could be a more important time than now to put our children first by getting them back into the classrooms. I understand there has been mixed guidance regarding the board's role in overseeing and improving of the superintendent's plans. That being said, Darien parents, Darien students, Darien taxpayers, and Darien voters deserve to know where each one of you falls on this important issue. Even a symbolic, non-binding vote would allow us all to clearly see where you stand. The question is simple. Do you believe all willing and able students should be in school? Yes or no? Now is the time for members of the Board of Education to take a stand and go on record. We need transparency from you as well. Thank you all for listening and Happy New Year. Let's get all our children back in school immediately and permanently.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Kaliatu Lublin, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you. My name is Katie Lublin. I live at 24 Maplewood Drive. I'm speaking tonight as the CDSP Special Education Subcommittee Chair. When the district announced in the fall that the hybrid reopening would offer a 4-day in-person week for specialized learning programs, I was encouraged. This distinction was recognition that certain students, specifically those with the highest support needs, cannot engage in distance learning. It set a precedent. I've received numerous phone calls and emails from parents reacting to what this week's full remote learning has meant for students in these programs. Earlier today, I emailed board members a series of questions that I would like addressed publicly. Here are a few of the sentiments shared with me in recent conversations prompting these questions. We are back to March with no support. Remote learning for these students is going through the motions at best and not worth the effort from teachers or parents. The lack of planning feels like lack of care. They've had 10 months to plan for this scenario, and nothing is different than the spring. Listening to these remarks brought to mind another quote often attributed to Gandhi. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. Overwhelmingly, the parents I spoke with expressed their support for and appreciation of their children's teachers and service providers. They recognized the difficult jobs these professionals face and praised their efforts and dedication. What then is the disconnect? We have learned this week that the problem is beyond a communication issue. It is a lack of planning issue. We are almost a year into this crisis, and many students in specialized programs still do not have a plan for a fully remote scenario. Parents have been asking for this plan for months. They were told no. A schedule emailed days before implementation without parent input does not count as an adequate plan. Parents that do have plans for their students have had to push and push their team to discuss and come up with a plan. This puts parents in a place where those who push or who have advocates and lawyers receive, and those who are quiet or wait for the district to act do not. As I said before, we know that our teams are dedicated to our students. That's not the issue. The issue is that communication and planning for children receiving services has been lacking in Darien.
Mrs. Lublin, you're almost at time.
I ask you now to please remedy this issue before our children lose any more critical time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lori Olson, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, my name is Lori Olson. I live at 16 Littlebrook Road North. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this. I'm sorry, I am the co-chair of CDSP. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. For the most part, thank you for addressing most of the concerns we were hoping to hear about tonight regarding the decision to go remote this week. Katie Loveland mentioned some thoughts regarding special education, but we would like to know more about the discussion on the timing of the decision to go remote this week, more explanation regarding the factors and input that inform the decision. We appreciate the complexity of the situation and the many factors that contribute to making the decisions, and that the first priority in all decisions is safety. Moving forward, we would ask that there be an ongoing conversation at the table about how, when, and if we get more of our students in the buildings more often. Whether it's a hybrid plus approach like New Canaan intends to try, or all Middlesex in person or other approaches. We would also request that we hear any new concerns as they relate to upcoming vacations, long weekends, as you are able. Lastly, regarding the budget, we are excited that budget season is upon us and that it is time to plan for the future. Thank you again to all of you for your tireless work on behalf of our children and their education.
Thank you, Mrs. Olson.
Melissa Alexandra Dunn, you are unmuted and recognized.
I'm Melissa Ullman Dunn, 175 Raymond Street. I wanted to share some of my concerns with remote learning for elementary school children. The district has implemented many health and safety measures, and there's not been any transmission of the disease within the schools. We have figured out that it's safe to have schools open, and we must continue to keep our Darien schools open. Over the past few weeks, my eager to learn, bright and happy kindergartner no longer shows the same enthusiasm for learning as she did in October, November, and part of December. Remote learning feels like a chore to her, and she misses her teachers, friends, and classroom. My daughter is highly motivated and completes her tasks and follows instruction from her teacher to a T while remote learning. However, despite the valiant efforts by our main kindergarten teacher, I can see that she has lost her spark. It breaks my heart. I no longer get the exciting and chatty updates from her about her school day and who she played with at recess and what the other kids had for a snack. The school day is now simply over. She's only starting her educational journey through the Darien public school system, and I don't want her to have a chip on her shoulder at such a young age. I'm constantly reminding her that both she and her main kindergarten teacher are doing a great job, because they are doing a great job, but I wonder how long my child's motivation and stamina for remote learning will last. Early learning is fundamentally a social process, and many children like my daughter thrive on day-to-day social interaction. In-person school fulfilled other needs for her that are simply irreplaceable. I hope that the district understands what they are doing to the social and emotional well-being of our children with remote learning. I've spoken with many other parents, and their children have exhibited far worse behaviors. Here are some direct quotes from other parents of younger elementary school children. My typical easygoing child started exhibiting odd behaviors at the onset of remote learning, and upon taking this child to the doctor, it's all anxiety related. My children are refusing to participate and are very distracted and angry when they do participate. My child tells me that they are lonely and sad without interacting with other kids their own age. This child has more anxiety when they are have remote learning days, becoming increasingly frustrated and agitated when they cannot get into a meet or speak in person to their teacher. Our children have been through a lot and are very resilient, but DPS needs to put the needs of our children first. School is a safe place and will continue to be a safe place. There is no reason for DPS to go widespread remote for weeks at a time. I hope this information will strike a chord with those in charge and compel them to act differently in the future. Please do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn.
Emily Shelley, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi. Okay, this is Emily Shelley. I live on 79 Inwood Road. I first wanted to thank you for taking the time to explain why a last-minute decision was made not to open schools this past Monday. It is helpful to know that there was a pre-scheduled meeting on December 30th that triggered the decision. I hope this type of transparency continues in future correspondence. I would like to express my concerns about the remote environment for all young learners, but most importantly, for my special needs child and all special needs children. I have twin kindergartners, one traditional learner and one with a learning disability. While I have some worries about my typical developing 6-year-old and the impact of remote learning on him, I will focus my comments on my special needs child and request that you allow him access to school in person, regardless of the decision made for general education. This is because how important in-person delivery of education is for him, and because it can be done safely due to the naturally small class sizes. Remote learning has been tough for my special needs child who has visual motor integration difficulties, lacks age-appropriate executive functioning skills, and does not have the ability to sustain attention over long periods of time. Despite help from amazing teachers, remote learning is not an effective way to deliver his education. My son does not sit still, stay in one room very long, and routinely loses track of his belongings, affecting his ability to complete tasks or keep up with the class. I have a full-time job, another kindergartner, and a baby, and cannot always assist. My son needs in-person attention as prescribed in his IEP, and remote learning is not an appropriate education for him. The decision to close in-person learning abruptly also exposed a lack of planning for our most vulnerable population. I have been asking to plan for this remote scenario since June, but have been met with resistance. The willingness to abruptly cut access to in-person learning without a plan in place for special education is concerning. The simple, safe solution is to, at a minimum, bring our most vulnerable group back to in-person learning as soon as possible and keep them there. There are only a handful of kids, and it's easy to adhere to physical distancing guidelines. We are no longer in uncharted waters. We know what to do to be safe, and we know in-person learning is the only way to provide special needs kids with a free and appropriate education. I'd like to end by thanking you all for all you do and for creating a safe environment for our kids to return to school in person. It has been I am so thankful. that we've gotten this much in-person school so far. And I really hope it can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shelley.
Elizabeth Pawlowski, you are unmuted and recognized. We're going to move to Taylor Carter. You are unmuted and recognized.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. Are you there?
Yes.
Sorry. I apologize about that. First, I'd like to thank the Darien Board of Ed and Dr. Adley for agreeing to speak with us tonight or listen to us. I would like to say, Dr. Adley, you sent us a hybrid plan in the beginning of November at the middle school with absolutely no discussion of plans to move the middle school back to full-time. As a parent of a sixth grader, I'm flabbergasted. We feel as if you've hoodwinked the entire middle school community. You've had no communication to the parents or students as to what it will take for us to go back full-time, which was furthermore, which you today, when asked this question, fumbled along and basically had no answer to the Board of Ed about what it will take to get our students back. They are missing so much. Hybrid does not work. My student has to have 2 laptops in order to keep up with the work expected due to navigating both Zoom and online work. Furthermore, he's expressed repeatedly how he does not feel like he can participate in class, ask questions, because he feels like he's disturbing his fellow classmates who are in class. This affects his grade and his morale. And moreover, he has now had over 2 months of not seeing some of his teachers face-to-face due to the hybrid schedule. This has led to missed assignments, lack of confidence, and pure frustration. The middle school years are an imperative part of social development. By keeping them hybrid, you're hindering our students from making new social connections, again, failing our children. The emotional well-being of our children has to be considered. All the top psychologists and pediatricians are in agreement that keeping our kids out of schools is going to increase suicide and mental disorders. All the recent data from Europe and United States and our own town and our own medical directors have said that kids are safer in school. They are not transmitting this disease. These students need to go back to school. They are not as safe with their friends as they are in school. So we please implore you to look at the data and bring these kids back to school and give these parents some communication about what is actually going on. We need transparency. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mrs. Pawlowski.
Taylor Carter, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you. Taylor Carter, 385 Middlesex Road. Dr. Adley and members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and Happy New Year. I'm the founder of the Teach Our Kids Facebook page and organizer of the petition that made the rounds this week. Teach Our Kids exists because parents who want their kids back in school don't feel they have a voice. As of tonight, 322 individuals from 182 households have signed our letter asking that schools reopen immediately. Sadly, others have declined, not because they disagreed, but for a stated fear of retribution. This fact speaks volumes. The fact that parents are afraid to speak up tonight or even sign a letter for fear of being called a denier, entitled, anti-administration, teacher hater, or worse, simply for the sin of wanting their children to attend school. The culture around this issue has become as unhealthy as the virus itself. But these parents aren't wrong to be upset. There is no data to support keeping our kids at home. From Thanksgiving to Christmas, a month everyone was highly concerned about, student caseloads in Connecticut were lowest among in-person learners, despite being the most frequently observed learning model. Remote learners actually reported the most cases in all but 1 week when hybrid learners were most affected. Further, there is no evidence that COVID is being transmitted in our schools. Whether caseloads go up or down, you, the governor, and experts everywhere have correctly told us that schools are the safest place for kids. I do not understand, unless you have changed your mind, why they should not go back immediately. In addition to being a more dangerous learning model for our children from a COVID perspective, remote learning has caused great suffering for our children in other ways. Heartbreaking stories have been shared both on the site and privately with me, stories that lead me to believe the mental health impacts of this pandemic are far worse than the physical ones for our children. Depression, anxiety, withdrawal, trouble sleeping, tantrums, and other regressions are causing damage we won't soon repair. I encourage you to consider a survey of some kind to evaluate this, but much of it could be improved by allowing them to simply re-socialize by attending school. New Canaan announced Monday that they intend to return next week with full in-person learning for both their elementary and middle school students. And with a new hybrid plus model for high school students, it puts them in the building 75% of the time. Our middle and high school students prior to December 16th were only attending at a rate of 40% or 2 days per week. Darien can and should be a leader
Almost that time, Ms. Taylor.
time as we were at times this fall, doing what we know is best for kids and acting in a way that inspires other districts to do the same. I hope to see our kids on the bus Monday morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor.
Username The Millers, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mary Jo Miller, and I reside at 52 Relihan Road. Thank you, board members and administration, for allowing this time to speak. You'll indeed hear a lot of frustration tonight with the decision to continue remote learning, especially for our K-5 learners. And while I agree that remote learning is not the best state of education for early learners, I'm here to address a different group, the group that is experiencing the most severe setbacks, our special education students. And my son is in the DLC program. He's nonverbal, severely autistic, and intellectually disabled. In the 5-day period the district went remote before break, I was able to conduct 3 hours of teaching total, 3 hours total in 5 days via Zoom. For a variety of factors, that's all we could do. Since December 16th, due to his lack of interventions, structure, and schedules, my son has had increased anxiety, aggression, displays of OCD, disrupted sleep, toileting setbacks, among other behaviors. It's uncomfortable for me to publicly share my son's struggles, but it's necessary because a reopening plan needs to be in place for our neediest, for their families, for their teachers who are also scrambling. 8 years ago, Darien School District experienced a headline-breaking scandal because it knowingly disadvantaged special needs children, not providing necessary services and violating IEPs. The same is occurring today, not intentional and obviously due to an unprecedented pandemic, but just as damaging, and no state waivers to IEPs have been issued. It was quite obvious that over the course of the fall, the district has made many improvements to e-learning for our younger students. While still not ideal, my kindergartner was able to participate independently, however unhappily, for periods of time in live teaching sessions. I emailed our principal to extend my thanks and to acknowledge the planning and execution by her incredibly impressive teacher. For my son, I had to serve as his one-to-one support because he cannot do anything independently. That's not to blame his amazing special ed teacher or team, but it did mean squeezing in sessions whenever possible. And certainly these hours and delivery methods did not meet the requirements of his IEP. Other districts in our area are continuing in-person special education programs for their neediest, while other children remain remote. Norwalk Superintendent Alexander Estella recently communicated to her district, and I quote, beginning January 11th, all employees not directed to quarantine will report to their work location when a school moves to a full remote learning plan. I'm just going to skip to the end because I have so much more to say. I just want to thank the Board of Ed, the administration, Shirley Klein, who's been working independently and diplomatically with families. I understand this is an incredibly challenging time, but I ask that this population be addressed separately from the general population, that our medical advisors be asked how we can safely continue in-person learning for this particular population that are so vulnerable. We are a small group of families, but our message is equally as important. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Christian Detterlizzi, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good evening. My name is Julie. I'm a parent and taxpayer, and tonight I applaud the parents who've summoned the strength to voice the needs of their children. They are devoted parents, and they are vested taxpayers, and they would like their schools reopened to teach their children, whom the CDC also suggests as being a safe and prudent place to put their children's future. Teachers, parents, and administration need to work collectively in an effort to understand, the community's needs. In my review of everyone's comments tonight, the common denominator is that parents feel that their voice is not being heard, and that is concerning. I've lived in this community for over 20 years, and I'm saddened to hear that the parents, the youth in this community is not being served. With respect to communication being open, there should be future meetings that allow parents to meet, discuss with the appropriate people who will take incoming calls, respond to emails appropriately, keyword response. And most importantly, care for the children. Common denominator is that the majority of parents in this district would like to see their children attend school, and there's ways to do it. We need to work with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Darlisi.
Teresa Vo, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. I'm actually going to say something different. I have a junior at DHS, and I'd like to thank you for calling remote this week. With 15 kids at DHS having tested positive just this week alone, I can't even begin to fathom what the contact tracing would have looked like at the high school this week. My son was contact traced just before Thanksgiving. It was not fun. We quarantined him correctly, and he did not enjoy it. We went hybrid after that, and happy to see fewer kids going into quarantine. While there isn't a lot of spread within the schools, without changes to the CDC guidelines on who is contact traced, we are still going to see lots of kids being quarantined. We are still going to see lots of staff being quarantined. And this is why we need to make these really tough decisions. So on behalf of my family, I would like to thank the administration for making that very difficult decision this week. As for the parents of the younger kids, I understand where you've been. My 2020 high school graduate was a cancer patient when she was in kindergarten. She missed a lot of school for hospitalizations and chemo treatments. She could not have play dates because she had to worry about getting sick. It was difficult, but I want to assure you all, she's fine now. She made it through. She's in college. She is thriving. We can't let this define our children. Children are resilient. We can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vogt.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for staying on the call and providing all the information. As I said, and I think we all said, we appreciate it. We are listening, we are hearing, and we are seeing all the emails and the information that you're forwarding to us. Thank you very much. With that, I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Deb Ritchie, do I have a second? Dennis Maroney. Thank you. Have a good rest. All in favor? I guess I just assumed that. Thank you. That's unanimous. We'll see you all here.